Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. My Salem News Channel colleague Dennis Prager coined the phrase, being on the left means never having to say you're sorry. But after multiple years of COVID lockdowns, businesses shut down, family businesses going bankrupt, kids kept out of school, losing social interactions with their peers, masks strapped on 5-year-olds at summer camps, maybe an apology is in order. Let's bring on our first guest. She's the author of the book Levi's Unbuttoned, The Woke Mob Took My Job but Gave Me My Voice, and a column that she just wrote in the New York Post. I lost my job opposing COVID school closings. I was right, but Dems won't apologize. She's Jennifer Say. Ms. Say, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, we know your story by now. You were the brand president at Levi Strauss, and you got canned because you dared to say, hey, this stuff ain't right. Listen, summarize your column for our viewers right now, because it's so important, because so many of us were on your side.
Yeah, not enough apparently, but certainly not in San Francisco. This week is the 1-year anniversary since I publicly resigned from my job after being told there was no position for me at the company anymore. I had publicly opposed the school closures and other restrictions to children in my city, San Francisco, but nationally as well. And for 2 years, I had an internal battle with my executive peers and my boss, the CEO, telling me I needed to just stop, all while they were sending their own kids to in-person private school.
Yeah.
My kids went and go to public school, but I wasn't just speaking on behalf of my children. My children have every privilege. We were able to manage through it, but 60% of the children in San Francisco public schools are low income, Black and brown students. And, they were really suffering at home. And it wasn't hard to imagine the impacts we're now seeing, the catastrophic learning loss and mental health impacts that these children continue to experience, as well as high dropout rates, let's be clear. The piece in the Post is really a look back at, what the heck happened, because it's generally acknowledged at this point I was right. And yet, here we are.
That's the key point here, because, listen, the science was never there to back up the school closures. I remember interviewing an infectious disease doctor in the earliest days, I think in May of 2020, and they said, yeah, this whole model of shutting down schools, this has to do with, like influenza, an outbreak of H1N1. This thing ain't that. We're not seeing anything with our children that suggests they're getting it, suffering from it, dying from it, or passing it along. But it went on for over a year, Ms. Say, and they still don't have the science to back it up. So, I mean, I'm with you. Where is the apology? At the very least, at the minimum, an apology.
Yeah, they won't acknowledge it. And, I would say, and I say this in the piece, we need more than an apology. We need accountability. This was a policy choice, and a catastrophic one at that. And it's one that, Europe didn't make. They opened schools in the fall. Some opened them as early as April 2020. Some never shut, like Sweden. Red states didn't make this choice. This was a policy decision by Democratic leaders, that was encouraged by public health officials across the country and left-leaning states and districts, and insisted upon by teachers' unions. So this didn't just happen. That's what they pretend now, right? This just happened. COVID did it. But that's not what happened. People made terrible choices.
It's a man-made policy and a man-made disaster. The other thing that they'll say is, well, it was the fog of war. We thought we did what was best. We didn't have all the information. But that's a lie, Ms. Say. They did. We had the same information when we were advocating for the schools to be open.
Who am I? I'm just some mom. I'm just like some normie mom. And I could read the data from March 2020 that said kids were at little to no risk. And, you cite this sort of pre-pandemic plans. The CDC's own pre-pandemic playbook says you never shut schools for more than a few weeks, even for a disease with a far higher fatality rate, because the harms are too great to children. And we just threw all that out the window. And this whole notion of the fog of war, then why was school disrupted for 2.5 years? Fine, I'll accept in the spring. That's as much as I'll accept, spring 2020. But by fall, there was no fog of war. We knew that children were not at risk, and we knew that they weren't the ones spreading it.
Yeah. So what do you think it was? A lot of people say it was politics. They just wanted people to be miserable so that they were angry during the presidential election and they'd vote Trump out. I don't think that was the entirety of it, but that may have been part of it. But it just kept going on. Or do you think they were just so stubborn, they were so sure that they were right that they couldn't possibly go backwards?
I think it's a combination of those things. I was very convinced in the beginning it was about Trump, and, good people would stay home forever and wear 27 masks and keep their children isolated, and bad people who agreed with Trump, wanted to open everything up. Although he drove the shutdowns in the beginning, so I'm not going to let him off the hook either. And, I did sort of naively think that come November, if Biden won, this would all sort of dissipate, and that did not happen. And I think at that point, there was a bit of sunk cost fallacy. They'd gone so hard and so much damage had been done already that you almost can't admit it. And you just kind of keep going and doubling down on a failed policy. And they terrified people. So at that point, it was in the ether, and people in the community couldn't let it go. And it was so tribal, as I'm sure you remember, and still is.
Oh, yes.
That people's identity became very wrapped up in being a pro-closure, pro-lockdown, I stay home forever.
Yeah.
But that was only feasible for, the well-to-do. Right. This really harmed low-income families the most.
Yeah, and so now I'm curious because, as everyone knows, you're the former brand president at Levi Strauss. You've been in these corporate settings. You've sat at these boardroom meetings and hear the highest level of executives discussing and debating these issues. What happened with corporations during this? Because it wasn't good for business. It wasn't good for their brands. Why did they go so far along with this?
It's such a great question. I ask myself all the time, why weren't businesses sort of demanding to be open so that they could, have a business and keep their employees employed? But, I think this COVID stance of zero COVID, I'll use that as the shortcut, became the woke left stance. And so many businesses today, at least coastal businesses, are aligned with this wokeism. And so it just became a key tenet of their beliefs. And if you were a good person, this is what you did.
Can I jump in on that? Are they so beholden to these woke ideas because they're afraid of protests or afraid of boycotts? They're afraid of a mob on social media? Or are there people in the boardroom who are committed to these ideas and they're trying to move these corporations in that direction?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think it's an attempt to profit off of Gen Z and millennial activism by saying, we are aligned with your values, therefore you should buy our product. So that's a cynical take, but I think a very valid one. I also think executives, it's not cool anymore to be super rich and keep all the money for yourself, although that's what they're doing. But they wrap it in these woke stances, and they want to be celebrated as social justice warriors. That is what is celebrated today, not being, a super rich business person. And so, it's this fake pose that they adopt so that people like them, which is how Sam Bankman-Fried described it. It enables them to avoid scrutiny in the press and amongst investors because they buy it too. They buy the lie, and amongst employees. And I think lastly, you're correct. They are afraid of these younger employees and younger activists who will take you down with a finger tap, on social media, and they won't, demonstrate any courage to stand up and push back and say, we're running a business here. We're going to provide a great product, and we're going to treat our employees fairly, what I would call normie capitalism. And they get all kind of caught up in this wokeness. I think, the former CEO who was just ousted from Disney is a great example of this.
Yeah, he is. And listen, I think ultimately the American people are attracted to and drawn toward courage in people who are outspoken, people like you, Jennifer, say, and I think that'll win the day. We got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.